They called us fragile. They called us insignificant. They thought we were too divided, too emotional, too late to the stars. But we remembered. We remembered what it meant to fall and rise again. We remembered what it meant to build cities from ash, to light fire in darkness, to dream when the void screamed impossible. They came with fleets of steel and minds made of cold logic, ancient empires, stretching across galaxies, 1,000,000 years of evolution. And yet, in all that time, they forgot something. They forgot the human spark. You see, we are not the strongest, not the fastest, not the oldest, but we are the hungriest, hungry for hope, hungry for meaning, hungry to reach farther than our eyes can see. They enslaved us, they studied us, they underestimated us, and then they tried to erase us. But you cannot erase an idea. You cannot kill a species that has turned every apocalypse into a new beginning, because every time we fall we rise higher from the ruins of Earth, from the shattered moons of Europa, from the blackened skies of Mars. We came back smarter, stronger, united, not by blood, but by the fire in our bones. This is not just survival, this is a declaration. This is not the end of the story. This is where the story finally begins. The galaxy will remember this day. The day humanity rose not as victims, not as servants, but as legends. We are the storm you never saw coming. We are the future you try to bury. We are humanity rising, and we are just getting started. Let me know if you want this adapted into a YouTube narration script, motion graphic storyboard, or background music cue format. Picture a universe where the oldest star-faring powers glide through the void, convinced their millennia of conquest have secured every corner of the sky. They glance at Earth, blue, battered, too late to the party, and dismiss us with a shrug. We are, to them, fragile creatures of temper and impulse, forever tripping over our own history. But what they miss is the rhythm beneath our scars. The way we turn catastrophe into blueprint, ruin into raw material, heartbreak into rocket fuel. They arrive with polished warships and algorithms colder than deep space, certain a single strike will fold us into footnotes. Yet the first sparks of resistance flicker in the dust of broken cities, and soon those sparks braid into wildfire. From the drowned coasts of our homeworld to the rust-red storms of Mars, a single idea threads through every survivor. Fall, yes, then rise higher. Humanity has always written its greatest chapters after the world swears it's the end of the book. So while empires older than our continents lean back in arrogant calm, we stitch ourselves together, scientist beside poet, farmer beside coder, driven by the hunger to matter. And when our engines finally howl to life and our fleet fans out against the night, the galaxy stares, stunned, as the species it called insignificant stands tall in the glare of its own legend. This is not survival. This is the prologue to everything we will become. Humanity is rising, and the story has only just found its voice. 1. They saw Earth as late to the stars, fragile, emotional, and forgettable, but what they missed was our fire. Sets the tone, underestimated humans, raw emotion, untapped potential. 2. We turned catastrophe into blueprint, heartbreak into rocket fuel. A poetic hook. Humans grow strongest in crisis. 3. They came with ancient fleets and cold logic, thinking they could break us in a single blow. Highlights the overwhelming odds and enemy arrogance. 4. But in the ruins of our cities, resistance was already learning to crawl, to stand, to burn. Embers of rebellion equals emotional and cinematic. 5. We didn't rise because we were chosen. We rose because we refused to be erased. Core HFY theme, defiance, not destiny. 6. From drowned coastlines to the dust storms of Mars, one truth pulsed in our blood. Fall, yes, but rise higher. Planetary scope, poetic rhythm, deeply human. 7. They had empire, we had purpose. a sharp, viral contrast, simple yet profound. 8. Poets stood beside engineers, farmers beside coders. We rose not through strength, but through unity. Goosebumps moment, human diversity as our superpower. 9. We are not a species. We are a spark. Symbolic, memorable, ideal for a viral quote or tagline. 10. This isn't survival. This is our beginning. And the galaxy will remember the day humanity rose. The closing punch, legendary, hopeful, defiant. They saw Earth as late to the stars, fragile, emotional, and forgettable. But what they missed was our fire. In the grand expanse of the galaxy, Earth was little more than a dim ember orbiting an ordinary sun. The old empires, forged in the hearts of dying stars and civilizations measured in epochs, had already charted the spiral arms and mapped the silence between galaxies. To them, we were an afterthought, a minor footnote scribbled at the edge of cosmic relevance. They observed us like one might watch a dying flame in a jar, expecting it to flicker out under the weight of its own chaos. They saw our wars, our greed, our fumbling first steps into orbit, and laughed. Not out of cruelty, but indifference. They had seen species rise and vanish before. They thought they understood the rhythm. A primitive race discovers fire, then the wheel, then war, and finally, extinction. We fit the pattern. In fact, we exceeded it. We didn't just fight each other. We tore our world apart with ideologies, poisoned our oceans with ambition, and filled the sky with ash and noise. So when we first lit our rockets and pierced the upper edge of atmosphere, they didn't see triumph. They saw noise, a spark, yes, but one that would burn out long before it ever reached their realm. What they never understood, what they couldn't, was the true nature of that spark, because it wasn't born from unity or perfection. It was born from chaos, from contradiction, from every broken promise and every shattered dream stitched together by the one thing that set us apart in the entire cold silence of the stars. We cared. We cared when we lost. We cared when we failed. We screamed into the void not because we expected it to listen, but because we couldn't accept silence. Every time the universe ignored us, we got louder. Every time it broke us, we rebuilt. Not the same, but better, more furious, more driven, not out of pride, but out of this deeply human need to matter, to leave something behind, even if it's just a bootprint in Martian dust, or a metal plaque, riding a probe into nothingness. They watched us from afar. They had probes, cloaked observers, hidden satellites, quietly recording our chaos like researchers watching bacteria evolve in a cracked Petri dish. They saw Hiroshima. They saw Chernobyl. They saw the collapse of cities, the rising tides, the smoke, the screams. They noted every rebellion, every injustice, every civil war that fractured our species again and again. And with each fracture, they shook their heads and updated their logs. Not yet. Not capable. Not worth contacting. But here's what they missed. The magic they couldn't calculate. They missed the way we wrote music from grief. The way we turned hunger into poetry. The way one human with a spark of hope could inspire millions with nothing more than a dream shouted into the darkness. They missed the first child who looked up at the night sky and said, "I want to go there." And then we did. We built machines with hands still bleeding from digging graves. We strapped ourselves to metal coffins with nothing but math and madness and whispered to each other, this might work. We launched not as a perfect civilization, but as a desperate one. And somehow it worked. We landed on the moon, not because we were ready, but because we couldn't not try. That was the first time the galaxy blinked. The ancient watchers reran their predictions. They recalculated the odds. They couldn't understand why a race so fractured, so seemingly self-destructive, had reached that far that fast. It didn't make sense. Civilizations like ours were supposed to destroy themselves before they ever tasted orbit. But we didn't follow the rules. We never did. We climbed from caves to satellites in less than 10,000 years, a blink by cosmic standards. Our rise was messy, irrational, and fueled by emotion. And that was exactly why it worked. Because we weren't running on logic alone, we were running on fire, on every ancestor who whispered, "Get up," when we fell, on every failure that taught us to rebuild stronger, on every voice that dared to say, "Maybe we're meant for more." They couldn't quantify that. So they kept watching as we expanded, slowly, awkwardly, but relentlessly. Mars colonies, lunar cities, mining ships threading the asteroid belt. Still small, still fragile, but no longer alone in the dark. We didn't come with sleek warships or perfect harmony. We came with patched hulls, stubborn grit, and a refusal to die quietly. And while they debated whether or not we were a threat, we kept building. That's when the mistake happened. A scouting vessel, one of theirs, crashed near one of our outer stations. Damaged, empty. We didn't destroy it. We didn't reverse engineer it for weapons. We fixed it. And inside it, we left a message, simple, honest: we're not here to conquer. We're here to learn. That one act changed everything, because it showed them something their empires had long forgotten: humility, curiosity, that wild, irrational hope that somehow, despite everything, connection is possible. And for the first time, they truly saw us, not as noise, but as a voice, not as a threat, but as a spark. And sparks, they remembered, can set stars on fire. We were never given peace. We earned it by crawling through fire. From the very beginning, our story was soaked in struggle. Every step forward was a battle, not just with nature or time, but with ourselves. Civilizations rose on the bones of fallen ones. Cities thrived for centuries only to crumble in moments. We built monuments, burned them down, and rebuilt them again. Taller, stronger, always just out of reach of perfection. To outsiders, it must have looked like madness, like a species addicted to its own destruction. But they couldn't see what we were really doing. Every collapse was a lesson. Every mistake became a map. We didn't fall just to fall. We fell to learn where the cracks were, so we could fill them with something better than before. Our disasters weren't the end of our progress. They were the blueprint. When the oceans swallowed coastlines, we didn't curse the tide. We learned how to build floating cities. When the skies blackened from ash and smoke, we invented ways to breathe again. Every system that failed taught us how to create one that couldn't. Pain was our engineer. Grief was our architect. We didn't become strong in spite of our heartbreak. We became strong because of it. Because when a storm ripped through everything we loved, we didn't just rebuild the walls. We reinforced the foundation. When a virus swept across the world and took millions, we built networks that would one day protect billions. And when a single malfunction tore a crew apart above Earth's orbit, we didn't ground the dream. We studied every screw, every line of code, and we sent the next ship higher. Our resilience didn't come from perfection. It came from the way we kept showing up after everything told us not to. We are a species born of aftermaths. We made art from tragedy, composed symphonies with trembling hands, wrote stories so powerful they could make strangers weep in languages they didn't even speak. We took our agony and turned it into momentum. Every war carved lessons into our DNA. Every injustice became a spark for revolutions we couldn't ignore. We learned that heartbreak can be turned into propulsion, into something that moves us. We called it the human spirit, like it was some abstract poetry. But it was always more than that. It was an engine, a quiet, stubborn, wildly inefficient engine that ran not on oil or energy, but on memory, on meaning, on the ghosts of what we lost and the visions of what we still hoped to reach. And when we finally looked up at the stars, not as distant lights but as destinations, we knew the risk. We knew we might fail again, but we also knew that failure wouldn't end us. It never had, so we launched. We launched knowing the odds, knowing the coldness of space, knowing that every system we'd ever created was once a disaster we survived. And somehow, that gave us power, because no matter what we encountered out there, hostility, silence, apathy, we were already masters of rebuilding from the ashes. We'd done it for thousands of years. We were fluent in recovery, so when the first off-world colony went dark, no signal, no survivors, we didn't stop. We studied every last transmission, traced every malfunction, and when we understood what went wrong, we didn't mourn for long. We redesigned, we replanned, we relaunched, because that's what we do. We take wreckage and use it as scaffolding. We take ruin and make it a launch pad. Every tear shed on earth added fuel to the fire that lifted us past it. Even our emotions, the ones others called weaknesses, became our greatest strength. Love made us leave Earth. Grief made us return. Anger made us fight for the future. Hope made us believe we could change it. To those watching us from above, it must have looked strange. A species held together by passion, stumbling constantly, bleeding from old wounds. Yet still pushing forward, always forward. We had no map, no ancient counsel guiding us, no perfect plan etched in starstone. What we had was memory, experience, pain that shaped our principles, and a refusal, deep and immovable, to repeat the worst of ourselves. Because even when history tried to pull us backward, we reached out with everything we had and pulled harder in the other direction. We are not clean, we are not simple, we are not predictable, but we are brilliant in chaos. We are artists of survival, poets of reinvention, engineers of redemption. And when we finally found ourselves face to face with civilizations far older, far more refined, they expected elegance, precision, order. Instead, they met a species forged in storms, fueled by stories and driven by loss. A species that, through all its shattered dreams and fractured beginnings, had learned how to do something remarkable. We turned catastrophe into blueprint. We turned heartbreak into rocket fuel. And now, we're coming with engines powered by everything we've ever overcome. Humanity is rising. They didn't come with war drums. They didn't roar or rage. They came in silence. Their ships unfolded from dark space like shadows with intent. Not beautiful, perfect, cold in a way only age can shape. Ancient vessels crafted with precision so absolute, they didn't need intimidation. Just presence, just inevitability. They didn't come to bargain, they didn't come to learn. They had seen species like ours before, rising too fast, shouting too loud, burning too bright. To them, we were another flicker in the dark. A flare of noise and ambition that would soon collapse into silence if left to our own devices. But they weren't willing to wait. So they acted. The first strike wasn't visible to most of Earth. It happened beyond our skies, silent, swift, decisive. A deep space listening post on the edge of Saturn gone. A Martian relay severed mid-transmission. Then, debris our satellites raining back to Earth like shooting stars with no wishes left in them. They didn't ask for surrender. They didn't give a warning. They believed, in all their cold certainty, that one clean cut would be enough, that we'd buckle the moment we realized the void was no longer empty. But they didn't understand what we were made of, because we didn't respond with elegance. We didn't form councils or quote treaties. We scrambled, we panicked, but then we did what we've always done best. We adapted. Every nation that had bickered over borders turned overnight into a united defense. Scientists worked by lantern light, when the power grid failed. Civilians armed themselves with whatever they could find, not because it would make a difference, but because standing meant something. And in the corners of broken cities and underground bunkers, a question began to burn. What if we fight back anyway? They thought their blow would break our will, but they'd never fought a species that learned to walk while bleeding, that built civilizations in flood zones, that learned to love in the middle of wars. Their logic, flawless as it was, could not measure the chaos of human stubbornness, because our weapons weren't ready. But we'd already survived extinction-level threats from within and without. We'd already buried continents under ice and rebuilt them under sun. The idea that someone, something, could destroy us with a single blow. We'd heard that story before, from tyrants, from nature, from time itself, and every time we proved it wrong. So when their machines descended, clinical, precise, optimized for suppression, they expected panic, collapse, silence. What they got was noise. We fought with scrap metal, drones hacked by teenagers, railguns powered by salvaged reactors. We threw satellites like stones. We blinded sensors with homemade static. We launched shuttles that weren't built for war, but learned quickly. And when they captured our signals, trying to decipher our strange, inconsistent language, all they found were songs and stories and voices saying one thing in 1,000 different ways. We're still here. Every hit they landed sparked 10 new ideas. Every ship we lost turned into a rallying cry, and every life taken became a reason to push harder, not surrender, because they misread the math. They thought one blow could end us. But they didn't realize we've already been broken, again and again, and every time we came back sharper, angrier, more focused. They had technology beyond anything we could match, but we had something they didn't. We had memory, we had instinct, we had the ability to turn grief into strategy, fear into fire, and most dangerous of all, we had nothing to lose. You see, they came to end a species. Instead, they awakened a force they didn't know existed. A force not born of superiority, but of sheer defiance, not cold like their logic, but burning, wild and uncontainable. It wasn't elegance that would save us. It was the fury of mothers holding rifles, of poets writing code, of orphans building rockets in the ruins of their homes. It was the kind of resistance that doesn't come from calculation, but from soul. They struck first, but we were the ones who made it personal, and that was their miscalculation. Humanity is rising. The first wave left us bleeding. Cities that once pulsed with life became scars across the Earth's surface. Towers fell not from time or decay, but from precision strikes that left nothing but echoes. Streets turned silent, skies turned red, networks collapsed. Entire populations vanished into dust before the rest of the world could even comprehend what had come for us. And still, somewhere beneath the rubble, something stirred. In basements with no power and no hope, someone lit a candle. In fractured data servers buried under the earth, fragments of old communication protocols blinked back to life. In a child's notebook, tucked in the pocket of a body pulled from debris, someone found the sketch of a spaceship. We had lost so much, but we were not done. The ones who came for us, they thought devastation would end the story, that if you tear down the towers and silence the transmissions, the species behind them would simply fade into memory. But they didn't understand humanity. They didn't understand that our resistance doesn't rise from strength. It rises from ruin, because in our darkest moments we do something miraculous. We remember each other. We reach out through ash and grief and find hands to hold. We don't fade. We rebuild using the broken pieces as fuel, and in the hollow, out ruins of our once proud cities. That is where the resistance began. Not in military compounds, not in government bunkers, but in shattered homes, beneath collapsed bridges, between bloodied streets where children once played. It began with whispers passed between survivors, with food quietly shared, with tools salvaged from wreckage and turned into weapons, art, hope. No one gave an order, no single leader rose. It wasn't an army, not at first. It was a feeling, a spark. It was the sound of someone hammering metal into armor in the dark, the scribble of new blueprints drawn on torn maps, the hum of hijacked frequencies filled with garbled voices daring to say we're alive. We didn't know how to win, but we knew we couldn't stop, so resistance crawled, at first just survival, stealing energy from ruined grids, growing food in hydro, tanks built from broken plumbing, coding countermeasures on scavenged laptops with flickering screens. Every little act of defiance was a heartbeat in the darkness, and then resistance stood, a rogue signal launched from a mountaintop, an old orbital cannon brought online by kids too young to remember peace, a satellite transmission that reached out into the void, not to plead but to declare, we are not done, and the fire spread. What began as flickers turned into flame. Hidden strongholds emerged from beneath the ruins, places where artists and engineers, ex-soldiers and schoolteachers, refugees and rebels gathered not just to fight, but to create something that couldn't be wiped out again. They came from everywhere, different languages, different beliefs, different scars, but they carried the same look in their eyes, one that said we have nothing left to lose but our future. The enemy couldn't track it. They didn't understand how something so fragmented could begin to unify. They mistook the chaos for collapse, but what they were really seeing was ignition. We'd spent centuries fighting ourselves, nations, ideologies, borders, and pride, and when the first shots came from beyond the stars, we stumbled. Of course we did, but underneath that shock, something ancient had already started to wake, the part of us that remembers how to rise, the part of us that hears impossible and answers with action, the part of us that, when everything is burned to the ground, doesn't just weep, but starts planting seeds. And make no mistake, our resistance wasn't pretty. It wasn't efficient. It didn't glide on algorithms or unfold in synchronized waves. It was messy, chaotic, human, but it burned. It burned brighter than any clean, calculated plan the enemy had ever encountered. Because they believed resistance came from strength, but we knew better. Resistance comes from pain, from love, from loss so deep it rewrites your bones. Resistance comes when your child's laughter is replaced by silence, and you decide that silence will not be the last thing they ever hear. That's what made us dangerous. We weren't fighting for survival. We were fighting for memory, for meaning, for every name they tried to erase, and every future they tried to steal. And when our resistance finally stepped into the open, when we launched ships from hidden craters and fired energy bursts powered by salvaged reactors, we didn't come as soldiers of an empire. We came as a storm made of billions of shattered pieces, finally learning how to fit together. We came not just with weapons, but with stories, songs, flags made from ash and stitched with defiance. And for the first time, the enemy hesitated, because this wasn't the resistance they expected. It wasn't polished, it wasn't organized, it was alive. It pulsed with history, burned with rage, and carried the full weight of everything we'd ever survived. And it would not stop. So, in the ashes of our ruined cities, in the silence where our music used to play, a new sound rose. A sound the galaxy had never heard before. A heartbeat of resistance. And it was getting louder. Humanity is rising. We weren't the destined ones. There was no prophecy waiting in the stars for us. No ancient code, no divine selection, no star, born right to ascend. The galaxy hadn't been holding its breath for humanity. In fact, if anything, it had already moved on. We weren't chosen, we were overlooked, and maybe that's the most important part of our story, because everything we became, we earned, not through fate, but through fire. You see, the universe didn't open a door for us. We kicked it in. We didn't wait for a signal or an invitation. We carved a path with bloody hands and broken dreams. Every advance we made was clawed out of struggle. Every breakthrough built on bones and memory. We weren't supposed to last this long. By every logical standard, we should have burned out back when we were still chasing shadows through forests. We were too aggressive, too emotional, too divided, too loud, too human, and yet, with every near extinction, with every collapse, we just kept coming back. Not because we were favored, not because someone was watching out for us, but because deep down, on some level we don't even understand, we decided we would not go quietly. We refused to be forgotten. They erased our satellites, so we lit the sky with fire. They silenced our voices, so we screamed into the void until it echoed. They struck our worlds, so we built new ones from the ashes. We didn't have the clean code of the ancients. We didn't have their perfect genomes or their 10,000-year plans. What we had was loss, and the stubborn refusal to let that be the end. And in that refusal, we found something unstoppable. We were the species that wouldn't quit, the ones who kept rising no matter how many times we were buried. Empires tried to crush us. Nature tried to drown us. Even our own worst instincts tried to end us. And still, we stood up over and over again because our history wasn't written in gold. It was written in scars, in broken monuments and rebuilt homes, in songs sung by the few who made it through, carrying the names of those who didn't. And that history carried weight. It mattered. So when the fleets came, when they hovered above our skies and looked down with that cold, clinical judgment, they thought it would be easy. We were nothing after all. Just another noisy world on the edge of relevance. A species that stumbled into the stars too fast and would fall just as quickly. But they didn't understand what we had become in the shadows of everything we'd lost. We were not afraid of death. We had met it too many times to flinch. What we feared was erasure. The idea that we might disappear without leaving a mark. That was the one fate we could not accept. So we rose, not to conquer, not to dominate, but to exist. Fully, loudly, completely. We wanted the universe to know us, to remember the sound of our laughter, the fury of our rebellion, the brilliance of our minds, the ache in our hearts. We wanted them to see our colors burned across the void, to know that we were here, every child born in a crater, every engineer rebuilding broken tech in a ruined lab, every artist painting futures on walls that barely stood. All of them were part of that rise. We didn't do it for power, we did it for presence. We rose because we would not be erased. They tried to wipe us out like data, format the planet, clean the slate, but we are not a file, we are not a system. We are a memory that refuses to fade, a legacy that keeps rewriting itself. We are stories passed from mouth to mouth in the dark. We are fingerprints on the edge of ancient glass. We are names carved into steel, whispered into wind, encoded into the stars. And even if they had won, even if they had burned our cities to the ground, silenced every frequency, blacked out the sky still, we would have found a way, because our rise was never about winning. It was about mattering. It was about proving to the galaxy and to ourselves that even a fragile, flawed, furious species from a pale blue dot could reach into the infinite and say, I was here. And that we did. We left our mark in more than battle. We left it in the compassion of those who refused to abandon the fallen, in the music played over static channels in the middle of war, in the math scratched onto walls by hands that trembled but didn't stop, in the resistance fighters who planted gardens inside collapsed cities, because life should never surrender, even when it bleeds. We are not here because we were meant to be. We are here because we fought to be. Because every time the stars told us no, we lit fires that said, "Watch me." And now the universe sees us, not as invaders, not as vermin, not even as survivors, but as something new, as something rising. Because we didn't wait to be chosen, we chose ourselves. Humanity is rising. We were no strangers to disaster. We grew up with it, woke up to it, slept beside it. On Earth, catastrophe was never an interruption. It was part of the rhythm. The coastlines that raised us eventually swallowed entire cities. Towers built to kiss the sky were torn apart by winds we couldn't name. Forests burned where children used to play. We watched oceans rise like judgment, watched rivers twist like knives through neighborhoods that once held laughter, and yet, through it all we stayed. We didn't run from the flood. We built rafts. We didn't surrender to fire. We planted seeds in the ash. We didn't fall and stay down. We fell and learned. That was always the secret. Fall, yes, fall hard, but rise higher. It became something deeper than a motto. It became instinct, an inherited rhythm encoded in our bones. Every generation it was tested again. Wars tried to bury us. Plagues tried to hollow us out. Systems failed. Power fell into the wrong hands. Heroes became villains, and sometimes villains became the only ones left to lead. And still, we didn't disappear. We adapted, we rebuilt, we remembered, and when Earth had given us everything it could, when her skies filled with smoke and her waters boiled and her soil begged us to rest, we looked up. Not because the stars were calling, but because the ground beneath us was breaking. And still, the truth pulsed in our blood. Fall, yes, but rise higher. So we left, first in orbit, then on the moon, then Mars, not as conquerors, not as colonists, but as survivors. We stepped onto red dust with the same boots that had once walked across cracked Earth. We wore helmets not made for glory, but for survival. And in that silence, the kind only another planet can offer, we planted our flag. It didn't say we won. It whispered, we made it. And yet Mars was never gentle. She had her own storms, her own silence, her own brutal way of testing whether we deserved to stay. Our machinery froze, our crops failed, our power blinked in and out like a dying heartbeat. People died, not for conquest, but just for trying to build something that could last, and still we stayed. We buried our dead beneath that dust. We spoke their names through radios and into the void. We honored them not with monuments, but with progress. For every soul lost, we sent another module, another shipment, another child born into the red twilight who would one day help turn Mars from wilderness into home. And it wasn't just Mars. It was everywhere we went. Every moon, every rock, every speck of potential out there in the black. We brought that same fire, that same instinct. Fall, yes, but rise higher. It showed up in the smallest things. A botanist on Europa who grew the first flower in ice. An old mechanic on Titan who fixed a failing oxygen pump with duct tape and prayer. A poet broadcasting verse into space because she believed someone would hear. It didn't matter that we stumbled. It mattered that we stood again. Because that was our pattern. Burn, rebuild, break, reform, collapse, then climb. We were never the strongest. We were never the fastest. But we were always the ones who came back. And as we spread further from Earth, as our signals stretched into space like open hands, the galaxy started to notice, not all at once, but here and there, whispers, signals we hadn't sent, patterns we hadn't written. Something was listening, watching, and when they finally came, those ancient beings of metal and mind, of logic refined over thousands of civilizations, They came with certainty, with expectation, with cold efficiency. They thought they understood us. They thought we'd fall at the first blow, and we did. Oh, we fell. Mars lost contact. Earth dimmed. Our outer colonies flickered like dying candles. But while they celebrated what they believed was a quick and clean end, we were already standing again, because every inch of us was built on that rhythm, that defiance, that quiet promise between the past and the future. Fall, yes, but rise higher. They didn't see the human child building a radio in the dark. They didn't see the engineer coding blind through the dust. They didn't see the people dragging broken solar panels up jagged hills just to bring back one spark of light. They didn't see us climbing, not from glory, but from grief. Because that's the part of our history no one ever truly understood. We weren't rising to escape the fall. We were rising because of it, because the fall taught us, sharpened us, pulled away the comfort, and revealed who we truly were beneath it all. Not perfect, but determined, not chosen, but impossible to erase. And the higher we rose, the more the galaxy began to realize. They weren't dealing with a species trying to dominate the stars. They were dealing with a species that had already survived its own apocalypse and learned how to climb from the ruins. A species that treated disaster as a beginning, not an end, and that made us unstoppable. From the drowned coastlines of Earth to the wind-scoured deserts of Mars, from the frozen moons of Jupiter to the orbital cities etched into black, we carried one truth in our bones: fall, yes, but rise higher. Humanity is rising.